Welcome to my channel and thanks for watching. The summer was supposed to be a chance to unwind. Nothing more. My friend and I had planned to spend a week at my uncle's countryside house, a peaceful getaway from the chaos of our everyday lives. I remember feeling excited as we packed our bags, eager for the change of scenery. My Uncle James had always been a distant yet fascinating figure, charismatic, well-spoken, and with an air of mystery that always seemed to surround him. He was nothing like the men we usually entered when we arrived. The house was just as I remembered, warm, inviting, and full of charm. Uncle James greeted us with his usual grace, his smile disarming and his eyes sharp. He gave us a tour, showing off the coy rooms, the sprawling garden, and the little reading nook by the window that I'd loved as a child. My friend Mia was immediately taken by him, laughing at his jokes and asking him questions about his life in a way that felt more engaging than casual curiosity. Dinner that evening was relaxed but filled with a subtle energy I couldn't quite name. James was a perfect host, effortlessly drawing us into conversation. He seemed genuinely interested in Mia's stories about her college experiences and career aspirations. I noticed how she leaned in slightly when she spoke, her laughter a little more frequent, her gaze lingering on him just a bit longer than necessary. It wasn't unusual for Mia to be friendly. She was always the more outgoing one, but something about the way James responded felt different. Over the next few days we fell into an easy routine: breakfasts on the patio, lazy afternoons exploring the property, and long evenings filled with conversation and wine. James was attentive, charming, and surprisingly engaging for someone much older than us. I started to notice small things: how his compliments seemed to carry more weight, how his gaze would sometimes linger just a moment too long. It wasn't blatant, but it was enough to plant a seed of awareness. Mia, however, seemed completely at ease. She laughed freely at his jokes, her energy infectious. I could tell she was enjoying his attention, and it wasn't long before I started to feel a strange mix of emotions. There was a quiet tension in the air, subtle but undeniable. I found myself questioning my own feelings. Was I jealous, or was I just uncomfortable with the way the dynamic were shifting? James, for his part, remained composed, never crossing any obvious lines, but there was a warmth in his interactions, a sense of focus that made you feel like you were the only person in the room when he spoke to you. It was disarming and unsettling all at once. I could see why Mia was drawn to him. Part of me hated to admit it, but I found myself drawn to him too. By the time the first evening ended, the lines of our relationships felt blurred. James was no longer just my uncle. He was something else entirely, and I wasn't sure how to feel about that. The following days brought an undeniable shift in the atmosphere. Conversations became more layered. Every glance and gesture carried weight, and the air seemed charged with something unspoken. James, with his natural charisma, had an ease about him that made it hard to draw clear boundaries. Mia thrived under his attention, and I couldn't ignore the way her energy seemed to change around him. She laughed louder, her words flowed effortlessly, and her gaze often lingered on his face. One afternoon, while we were in the kitchen preparing lunch, James leaned over to help Emma slice vegetables. His hand brushed hers as he steadied the knife, and they exchanged a look, brief, subtle, but unmistakable. I was standing a few feet away, but it felt as if the room had narrowed. The moment stretched into something heavier than it should have been. Mia didn't pull away, and James didn't apologize. Instead, they continued as though nothing had happened, leaving me to wrestle with what I just witnessed. That evening the tension only deepened. We were sitting outside under the stars, enjoying a bottle of wine James had opened to celebrate good company. Mia sat next to him, her chair pulled slightly closer than mine, her laughter rising and falling in rhythm with his stories. James was at ease, his charm magnetic as he regaled us with tales of his younger days, his voice smooth and confident. I tried to join in to keep the dynamic light and balanced, but the way Mia's attention was locked on him made me feel like an outsider in a space that should have been ours to share. At one point, James turned to me, his gaze steady and warm. You've grown into quite an intelligent, beautiful woman, he said, his tone casual but his words hitting me like a wave. I felt my cheeks flush, a mixture of flattery and discomfort swirling inside me. Mia didn't seem to react outwardly, but there was a flicker in her eyes that I couldn't place. Was it jealousy or something else? The night deepened, and with it came a sense of closeness that bordered on dangerous. James suggested we play a game, something simple and fun to keep the conversation flowing. As the night wore on, the rules of the game seemed to blur, turning into a playful exchange of personal questions and hypothetical scenarios. The questions became increasingly bold, the answers laced with double meanings that hinted at desires we all seemed too afraid to fully acknowledge. I couldn't ignore the way James's attention shifted seamlessly between Mia and me. He knew exactly what to say to make us feel special, his words walking the line between harmless flirtation and something much deeper. I felt trapped between wanting to distance myself and the strange allure of his presence. Mia, on the other hand, seemed to embrace it fully, her laughter spilling into the quiet night as if she'd forgotten all the boundaries that once existed. When we finally decided to call it a night, the energy lingered thick and unresolved. As I lay in bed, I couldn't stop replaying the moments over and over in my mind, the touches, the looks, the words that seemed so innocent yet carried so much weight. Something was changing between us, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, I knew we were heading toward a line we wouldn't be able to uncross. The night had an unsettling stillness broken only by the occasional creak of the house. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with everything that had transpired. I tried convincing myself it was all in my head, that James was just being his usual charming self and Mia was merely enjoying the attention, but deep down I knew there was more. Restlessness got the better of me, so I slipped out of bed, hoping some fresh air would help. As I walked quietly toward the living room, I heard faint voices. My stomach twisted as I moved closer, the low murmur of James's voice blending with Mia's soft laughter. They were sitting on the couch, their bodies angled toward each other. James leaned in slightly, his hand resting casually on the back of the couch, dangerously close to Mia's shoulder. She wasn't pulling away, in fact she seemed fully engaged, her face illuminated by a look of fascination and something deeper. I froze, my heart pounding. The sight of them together, so close, so comfortable, felt like a betrayal. Even though no promises had been made, no lines officially crossed, I couldn't bring myself to step into the room, but I couldn't walk away either. I stayed hidden, watching the scene unfold with a mix of jealousy, anger, and a strange, unspoken curiosity. Their voices were too low to make out the words, but their body language said enough. Mia's hand moved briefly to brush her hair back, a small but telling gesture that revealed her nerves, or maybe her excitement. James shifted closer, his knee now nearly touching hers. The way they looked at each other sent a wave of unease through Me yet I couldn't stop watching then as if sensing my presence Mia's eyes flickered toward where I stood for a moment our gazes locked her expression wasn't one of guilt or embarrassment, but something more complicated defiant. Almost staring she didn't move away from. James didn't break the moment they were sharing instead she held my gaze for a second longer before turning back to him. A small smile playing on her lips I felt. A surge of emotions anger at her. Boldness confusion about what this meant. For our friendship and something I didn't want to admit a pang of envy for. The way she held his attention as much. As I wanted to walk away I found myself stepping into the room instead my movements slow and deliberate. James looked up his expression unreadable. Couldn't sleep he asked his tone as calm and casual as ever his eyes met mine. Steady and knowing as if he was fully aware of the storm raging inside me. I guess not I replied my voice quieter than I intended. For a moment the air was thick with tension the three of us locked in an unspoken understanding of what was happening. James didn't move, didn't falter and neither did Mia. It felt as though the room had shrunk, the space between us collapsing under the weight of something inevitable. James gestured to the seat next to him, his movements slow and deliberate. I hesitated but my body moved almost instinctively taking the place he offered. Mia didn't seem to mind if anything she shifted slightly making room as though she expected this. What followed was a moment I can't fully explain. There were no words, only a quiet exchange of looks and gestures that spoke louder than anything we could have said. The boundaries we clung to so tightly had vanished, replaced by a dangerous sense of closeness. I felt the weight of his presence, the warmth of Mia beside me, and the undeniable pull of something forbidden. It was a breaking point the moment we crossed into a territory we couldn't retreat from. As the night stretched on, I knew everything was about to change and there was no going back. The morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and unforgiving. I woke up with a heavy weight in my chest, the events of the night before replaying vividly in my mind. Every look, every touch, every choice. I couldn't escape the feeling that I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. The guilt sat like a stone in my stomach, yet there was an undeniable part of me that wasn't entirely regretful, a part that clung to the thrill of it all. I lingered in my room longer than usual, unsure how to face either of them. When I finally stepped out, the house felt eerily normal, as if nothing had happened. Mia was in the kitchen sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone, her expression unreadable. James was outside on the patio, leaning back in his chair with a calmness that felt almost calculated. Mia looked up briefly when I entered, her face giving away nothing. "Morning," she said casually, as if the tension from the night before had evaporated overnight, her tone unsettled me. Was she pretending nothing happened? Or was she so unaffected that it didn't even matter to her? I couldn't tell, and the uncertainty gnawed at me. I poured myself a cup of coffee and joined her at the table, the silence between us heavy and awkward. For a moment I considered bringing it up, asking her how she felt, but the words wouldn't come. What was there to say that I felt conflicted, ashamed, and strangely exhilarated all at once? That I didn't know where we stood as friends anymore. The questions swirled in my mind, but I kept them to myself. James walked in a few minutes later, his presence commanding the room as always. He greeted us both with a warm smile, his demeanor completely unaffected. If he felt any guilt or discomfort, he didn't show it. He was the same composed, charming man he'd always been, and it made me question everything. Was this just a game to him, a fleeting moment he could brush off while I was left to carry the weight of it throughout the day. The three of us moved around the house like strangers trying to play the roles we assigned ourselves. Mia and I avoided being alone together, both of us sticking close to James as if his presence could somehow diffuse the tension, but it was there lingering in every glance, every pause, every unspoken word. By evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I found myself retreating to the little reading nook by the window, seeking solace in the quiet. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. What did this mean for my relationship with Mia, with James, with myself? Mia joined me after a while, sitting down across from me without a word. For a long time we just sat there, the silence thick between us. Finally she spoke, her voice low and careful. So what happens now? I didn't have an answer. I wasn't even sure what the question really meant. All I knew was that something between us had changed, and there was no way to go back to the way things were before. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized that the choices we'd made would stay with us, shaping the way we saw each other and ourselves. And though the house was quiet, the weight of what we'd done echoed louder than any words could.